Welcome to your deep dive. Today we're diving into the world of persuasion. How people like compliance professionals, marketers, and even fireflies use, well, kind of sneaky tactics to get us to say yes.
Yeah, it's really fascinating stuff.
It is. We're going to be looking at Influence, the Psychology of Persuasion by Robert Cialdini.
A classic.
It is a classic. It's packed with research and real-world examples, and it just might make you rethink some of your everyday interactions.
It's amazing how Cialdini reveals these almost subconscious patterns, in our behavior.
Right.
He actually compares it to how animals respond to specific triggers.
Oh, like a moth to a flame.
Exactly. He uses the example of mother turkeys.
Okay.
They're hardwired to respond to the cheep sound of their chicks.
Oh.
It's a simple trigger
Yeah.
that instantly activates this complex behavior nurturing.
Right.
And what's so fascinating is that this, click, whir response, it's incredibly efficient. The mother turkey doesn't have to overthink it. She just reacts.
So are you saying that we humans are running around like turkeys responding to cheep?
Well, and not quite, but we do have similar automatic responses based on stereotypes or rules of thumb.
Okay.
Think of them as, mental shortcuts that help us navigate this complex world.
Right.
The problem is that compliance professionals,
Yeah.
the people who are experts at getting us to do what they want, they know exactly how to exploit these shortcuts.
So how do these click-whir responses actually play into persuasion? Can you give us like a specific example from the book?
Yeah. Cialdini describes this study where researchers asked to cut in line at a Xerox machine.
Okay.
And when they simply said, "Excuse me, I have 5 pages. May I use the Xerox machine?"
Yeah.
Only 60% of people agreed.
Okay.
But when they added the word because and any reason, even a meaningless one, like because I have to make copies, compliance jumped to 93%.
So it's not even about the reason itself.
No.
It's just the presence of a reason that flips the switch
Yeah, it seems that way.
in our brains.
The word because triggers an automatic response,
Wow.
even if the logic doesn't really hold up under scrutiny.
Huh?
That's why you'll often see this tactic used in advertising and marketing. Buy this product because it's new and improved.
Oh, so just by adding a because, they can just bypass our critical thinking and tap right into that click-whir response. I'm starting to see how subtle these tactics can be.
Right?
Are there other ways that our perceptions can be kind of like manipulated?
Definitely. Cialdini talks about this jewelry store where turquoise jewelry wasn't selling.
Okay.
And you'd think lowering the price would be the solution, right?
Yeah, makes sense to me.
But what actually happened is that sales skyrocketed when the owner accidentally doubled the price.
Wow.
For those customers, they weren't turquoise experts. A higher price signaled higher quality.
Okay.
Their brains went, expensive equals good. Another click, whir response.
That's incredible. So our brains are constantly making these little judgments based on these shortcuts. And compliance professionals are using that to their advantage.
Absolutely.
Wow. This is making me rethink all those limited time offers and exclusive deals I see everywhere.
Absolutely. But those tap into the scarcity principle, which we'll discuss later.
Okay.
Right now, let's move on to a principle deeply ingrained in human societies, the rule of reciprocation.
The old give and take.
Yeah.
I feel like we all kind of know about that on some level.
We do, but Cialdini's research reveals just how powerful this rule is.
Right.
And how it can be used to make us feel obligated, even for things we didn't ask for. He actually tested this out himself.
Okay.
He sent Christmas cards to a bunch of complete strangers.
Okay.
And guess what?
They sent cards back.
Most of them did.
Wow.
Without even knowing him.
That's wild.
This demonstrates that simply receiving something,
Yeah.
even unsolicited,
Yeah.
can trigger a feeling of indebtedness.
So it's like those free gifts you get in the mail that make you feel obligated to donate to a charity.
Exactly. It's a powerful tactic used by charities, marketers, and yes, even those pesky salespeople who show up at your door.
Right.
Think about all those free samples you get at the grocery store.
Okay, I see, yeah.
It's all about reciprocation.
Yeah, I'm starting to see the pattern here.
Yay.
But those are pretty small gestures.
Yeah.
Can reciprocation really influence, like, bigger decisions?
Absolutely. A researcher named Regan conducted a study where he paired up students for an art appreciation experiment.
Okay.
And one student, secretly working with the researcher, either did a small favor for their partner, like buying them a Coke,
Okay.
or didn't.
Okay.
Later, that same student would ask their partner to buy raffle tickets.
Okay.
The results.
Yeah.
Those who had received the Coke bought twice as many raffle tickets.
So even a simple act of kindness like buying someone a drink
Yes.
can create, like, the sense of obligation. That's a little unsettling.
It is. What's even more fascinating is that the participants who received the Coke bought more tickets, even if they didn't particularly like the student who gave them the Coke.
Oh, wow.
This suggests that the obligation to reciprocate can even outweigh personal feelings.
Wow. Okay, so give and take isn't just a polite social custom.
No.
It's like this powerful psychological force that can really influence our behavior.
Absolutely.
But Cialdini talks about another tactic related to reciprocation.
Yeah.
The rejection then retreat technique, right?
Yes. It's a clever strategy that involves making a large request first, knowing it'll probably be rejected.
Right.
But here's the twist. That initial rejection makes the smaller request that follows seem much more reasonable.
You know what? I think I've actually fallen victim to that one before.
Really?
It reminds me of this time a Boy Scout got me to buy a whole box of candy bars.
I'd love to hear about that. How did you pull it off?
So this, eager scout comes to my door selling tickets to the circus. $5 each. I politely declined, but then he hit me with, well, how about a couple of these delicious chocolate bars for just $1?
And feeling guilty about the initial rejection.
Yes. I caved and bought the candy bars. Even though I didn't even really want them.
Right.
It felt like such a small request compared to the circus tickets.
That's a perfect example of the rejection then retreat technique, or as it's sometimes called, the door in the face technique.
Okay.
The bigger request sets the stage, making the smaller ones seem much more appealing.
Yeah.
Cialdini suggests that this strategy not only increases compliance, but also makes us feel more responsible for the agreement.
So we're more likely to follow through because we feel like we've negotiated a better deal.
Right.
It's almost like a win-win situation, but not really.
Exactly. Cialdini argues that this tactic was even used in high-stakes situations.
Really?
He points to the Watergate scandal as a possible example.
Now that's interesting.
Yeah.
How did that play out?
It involved G. Gordon Liddy, who proposed increasingly outrageous plans to the Nixon administration, including kidnapping and blackmail.
Wow.
These initial proposals were so extreme, they were immediately rejected.
Oh.
But when Liddy finally presented his bare-bones plan to bug the Watergate Hotel, it seemed much more reasonable by comparison.
So the outrageous requests actually paved the way for the final, still ill-advised plan to be accepted.
That's the theory. It's like a psychological sleight of hand. And it's not just about political schemes. Think about everyday negotiations. Let's say you're trying to get a raise. Instead of starting with your desired amount, you could ask for more. Knowing your boss will likely push back. Then, when you concede and ask for your original amount, it feels like a compromise they helped create.
I'm starting to see how powerful this technique can be. It's like judo.
Yeah.
Using your opponent's resistance against them.
Exactly. And as with all these persuasion tactics, awareness is key.
By recognizing these patterns, you can avoid being manipulated and make more informed decisions.
Okay, so we've covered click-whir responses.
Yeah.
And the rule of reciprocation.
Yes.
Including that sneaky rejection then retreat technique. Are there other principles that we should be on the lookout for?
Absolutely. Cialdini dives into a fascinating principle that drives our behavior. Commitment and consistency. He argues that even small commitments can lead to larger, more consistent actions, particularly when those commitments are made publicly.
This one hits close to home. A couple years ago, my son was obsessed with this talking robot toy that was impossible to find before Christmas. And I promised him he would get it, but every store was sold out. I ended up getting him a different, equally expensive toy, but
then the toy companies played their hand.
Yeah, after Christmas, the ads for the robot started running again. And my son, of course, was devastated. But you promised!
So guess who found themselves back at the toy store, buying a second expensive toy?
You fell victim to a classic commitment and consistency trap.
Yeah.
The toy company knew that parents who had already made a promise would be more likely to buy the robot once it became available again.
It was brilliant marketing, but it was incredibly frustrating.
Right.
And to make matters worse, the same thing happened the following year with a different toy.
Oh my goodness.
I know.
This is a prime example of how our desire to remain consistent with our past actions, especially public promises, can be exploited.
Yeah.
Cialdini suggests that we have a deep-seated need to appear consistent, both to ourselves and to others.
Right.
And this need can be stronger than our desire to make rational choices.
So even small commitments, especially public ones, can set the stage for larger, consistent actions.
Exactly. And Cialdini highlights how powerful this principle can be even in extreme situations.
Yeah.
He discusses the Chinese POW camps during the Korean War, where seemingly trivial requests were used to get American prisoners to comply with larger demands.
This sounds intense.
Yeah.
What kind of requests?
It might start with something seemingly harmless, like asking a prisoner to write a simple pro-communist statement.
Yeah.
Something like, the United States is not perfect.
Okay, that doesn't seem like a huge deal.
Right.
Yeah.
But then they might ask the prisoner to read that statement aloud in a group discussion.
Okay.
Or even broadcast it on the camp radio.
So the initial small commitment escalated into a much larger and more public one.
Exactly. Once a prisoner had made those public commitments, they were much more likely to comply with even greater demands.
Oh, wow.
Even ones that went against their own beliefs.
That's a chilling example of how this principle can be used to manipulate people. Are there ways to resist this kind of pressure?
There are. As always, awareness is the first step.
Okay.
Cialdini also suggests that we need to recognize when our commitments are based on external pressures rather than our internal values.
Okay.
If we feel pressured into making a commitment, we should ask ourselves whether it aligns with our true beliefs.
Right.
If it doesn't, we should be willing to back out, even if it means admitting we were wrong.
That's easier said than done.
It is.
But I see your point. Sometimes staying true to our values means being willing to change our minds. This is definitely making me think about the commitments I make and the reasons behind them.
Yeah.
But before we move on to the next principle, I have a question about the previous one.
Okay.
You mentioned how effective reciprocation can be, especially when it involves giving someone something.
Yeah.
Even if it's unsolicited.
Right.
But what about when it's not about material things?
Yeah.
What about, like, favors or acts of service?
That's a great question, and it's something that Cialdini explores in depth.
Okay.
He argues that the principle of reciprocation applies to all kinds of exchanges, not just material ones.
Right.
In fact, favors and acts of service can be even more powerful than gifts.
Oh, okay.
Because they often require more effort and thoughtfulness.
So if someone does me a favor, I'm more likely to feel obligated to reciprocate.
Exactly.
Even if the favor wasn't something tangible.
Exactly. And that obligation can be leveraged in many ways.
Go.
For example, imagine a colleague helps you with a project at work, even though they were busy with their own tasks.
Right.
You're more likely to feel obligated to help them out in the future, even if their request is unrelated to the original favor.
This makes me think about all those times I've felt pressured to say yes to requests because someone had helped me out in the past, even if I didn't really have the time or energy to reciprocate.
It's a common experience, and it highlights the importance of being mindful of the reciprocity rule.
Right.
It's not about rejecting all acts of kindness or refusing to help others.
Right.
It's about being aware of the potential for obligation and making sure that our decisions are based on our own values and priorities, not on a sense of indebtedness.
So it's about finding a balance between being helpful and generous.
Yeah.
And setting healthy boundaries.
Exactly. And it's about recognizing that sometimes the best way to reciprocate a favor is simply to express sincere gratitude.
That's a great point. Sometimes a simple thank you is enough. Okay, so we've delved into the nuances of reciprocation, but Cialdini also talks about the power of social proof, right? The idea that we tend to follow the lead of others, especially in uncertain situations.
Yes, the classic monkey see, monkey do phenomenon. It's a powerful force that shapes our behavior in countless ways.
It's like when you're looking for a restaurant and you see a long line out the door.
Right.
You automatically assume it must be good.
Right. Exactly. We tend to think that if a lot of people are doing something, they must know what they're doing. It's a mental shortcut that helps us make quick decisions, especially when we're unsure of what to do.
But this reliance on social proof can also lead us astray, right?
Absolutely. Cialdini highlights the tragic case of Catherine Genovese.
Oh, right.
A woman who was murdered in New York City while 38 of her neighbors watched from their windows.
That's a horrifying story, yeah.
Yeah.
What happened? Why didn't anyone help?
It's a classic example of the bystander effect.
Okay.
Each individual assumed that someone else would call the police, so no one did.
Oh, wow.
The presence of other witnesses actually decreased the likelihood of anyone taking action.
That's terrifying. So the more people there are,
yeah,
the less likely we are to help.
It can happen. Researchers have replicated this effect in numerous studies.
Oh, wow.
In one experiment, participants were less likely to help someone having a seizure when they believed other witnesses were present.
So safety in numbers isn't always true, especially in emergencies.
It's a sobering thought.
Yeah.
But as with all these persuasion principles, understanding the bystander effect can help us make more conscious choices.
Right.
If we find ourselves in an emergency, we need to be aware of this potential for inaction and take decisive steps to get help.
So if we see someone in trouble, what should we do?
Cialdini offered some practical advice. First, make it clear that you need help. Don't assume people will recognize the situation as an emergency. Be specific and direct.
Instead of shouting, "Someone help."
Yes. Focus on one individual and ask them directly for assistance.
Okay.
For example, you could point to a specific person and say, "You in the red shirt, call 911."
That makes a lot of sense. It removes the ambiguity and places responsibility on a specific person.
Exactly. And it could be the difference between getting the help you need and becoming another victim of the bystander effect.
This is such important information. It's making me rethink how I might react in an emergency situation.
Yeah.
But social proof isn't just about emergencies, is it?
No, it's not.
It affects our everyday decisions as well.
Absolutely. Think about the way advertisers use testimonials, especially from ordinary people. They're playing on our tendency to follow the lead of those who are similar to us.
Like those ads where they show everyday folks raving about a new cleaning product or weight loss program.
Exactly. They make us think, well, if it worked for them, maybe it'll work for me too.
It's like those online reviews where you see hundreds of people giving a product 5 stars.
Yeah.
You automatically assume it must be good.
Right. You've hit the nail on the head.
Yes.
Social proof is everywhere.
Yeah.
We're constantly being swayed by it, whether we realize it or not.
Right.
It affects how we choose restaurants, movies, even political candidates. It's a powerful force.
Yeah.
And while it can be helpful in some situations, it's important to be aware of its potential to mislead us.
So how can we become more discerning consumers of social proof?
It starts with recognizing that popularity doesn't equal quality or truth. Just because something is trending or has a lot of positive reviews doesn't mean it's the right choice for you. It's important to do your own research, consider your own needs and values, and not be afraid to go against the grain.
That's empowering. So it's about taking back control and making our own informed decisions, rather than letting the crowd dictate our choices.
Exactly. Remember, you are the ultimate authority on your own life.
Well, that's a powerful message to keep in mind. Okay, we've covered click-whir responses, the rule of reciprocation, the bystander effect, and the power of social proof. Are there other principles we should be aware of?
Absolutely. Cialdini explores the principle of liking.
Okay.
We're more likely to be persuaded by people we like.
Right.
Which seems obvious, but there are some subtle aspects to this principle that are fascinating.
Like what?
Well, physical attractiveness is a factor, but so is similarity.
Okay.
We tend to like people who are similar to us in terms of their background, values, or even just their opinions.
That makes sense. Birds of a feather flock together, as they say.
Exactly. And compliance professionals use this to their advantage.
Oh.
They try to create a sense of rapport by finding common ground with us, complimenting us, or even just mirroring our body language.
So we need to be aware of those subtle attempts to build rapport.
Yes.
Because they can make us more susceptible to persuasion.
Precisely. It's not about being suspicious of everyone who's nice to us. It's about recognizing that liking can be a powerful tool of influence.
So if someone is laying on the charm a bit too thick, it's a sign to proceed with caution.
Exactly. And it's a reminder to focus on the substance of what's being said, not just on the likability of the person saying it.
Good advice. So we've got to be on guard against those who use liking as a weapon of influence. What's next? What other persuasive tactics are lurking out there?
Well, Cialdini delves into one that's both fascinating and a little frightening, the power of authority.
Oh, sounds intriguing.
Think back to your childhood. How many times were you told to listen to your teacher or do what the doctor says?
Countless times.
Yeah.
It's ingrained in us from a young age.
Exactly. And for good reason, obedience to authority is essential for a functioning society.
Right.
But the problem is that this deep-seated tendency to obey can be exploited.
Cialdini talks about the infamous Milgram experiment, right?
Yes.
The one where participants were told to administer electric shocks to another person?
Yes, that's the one. It's a chilling example of how easily ordinary people can be persuaded to act against their own moral compass when faced with a strong authority figure.
Yeah, the results of that study were truly disturbing. It makes you wonder how susceptible we are to this kind of influence.
And what's even more unsettling is that Cialdini points out that we're not just influenced by legitimate authority figures like doctors, police officers, or teachers, but also by the symbols of authority.
What kind of symbols?
Titles, uniforms, even expensive clothing can trigger automatic deference.
Oh, okay.
Think about how you might react differently to someone wearing a doctor's coat versus someone in jeans and a t-shirt.
Okay, I can see how that might, unconsciously influence my perceptions. But are you saying that we should be suspicious of everyone wearing a uniform or carrying a briefcase?
Not necessarily, but it's important to be aware of these automatic responses.
Right.
And to question the legitimacy of authority figures.
Okay.
Especially if something feels off.
So if a bank examiner shows up at my door demanding my account information, I should be skeptical.
Absolutely. Con artists often exploit our tendency to defer to authority by using fake titles and uniforms.
Right.
It's a reminder to trust our instincts and to verify information before blindly following someone's instructions, especially when it comes to personal or financial matters.
This is making me realize that I might be a bit more susceptible to authority than I thought. What are some ways to resist this kind of influence?
Cialdini suggests asking ourselves a few key questions when confronted with an authority figure.
Okay.
First, is this person truly an expert?
Right.
Do they have the credentials and experience to back up their claims?
Okay.
Second, are they trustworthy? Do their actions and motives align with my own values?
Okay.
And perhaps most importantly, are they arguing against their own interests?
Wait, what do you mean by that last one?
If someone is willing to acknowledge even small drawbacks in their position or product,
right,
it can make them seem more credible and sincere. It disarms our skepticism and makes us more likely to trust their overall message.
So a little bit of humility can actually increase persuasiveness.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. That's like the opposite of those pushy salespeople who make you feel pressured to buy something.
Exactly. Authenticity is key.
Yeah.
People can spot a phony a mile away.
Okay. This has been eye-opening. We've covered click, whir, responses, reciprocation, social proof, liking, and the power of authority. It's a lot to keep in mind.
It is.
Yeah.
And we're not done yet. Cialdini explores one more principle that taps into a deep-seated human desire. The scarcity principle.
Well, yes, the allure of the rare and forbidden.
Yeah.
I think we've all experienced that on some level.
Absolutely. Things become more desirable when they are less available.
Right.
Or when access is restricted.
I experienced this firsthand. When the Mormon temple in Mesa was temporarily open to the public a few years ago, I felt this overwhelming urge to visit.
Wow.
Even though I'm not even Mormon.
That's a perfect example of the scarcity principle at work. It wasn't about the temple itself.
Yep.
It was about the limited time opportunity to see something that's normally off limits.
It's like that saying, you don't know what you've got till it's gone.
Exactly. And Cialdini points to some fascinating research that demonstrates this principle.
Okay.
In one study, participants rated cookies as more desirable when they came from a jar with only 2 cookies left, compared to a jar with 10.
So even something as simple as a cookie can become more appealing just because it's scarce. It's making me think about all those limited time offers and, while supplies last, sales tactics.
That's exactly what they're banking on. They use deadlines, limited quantities, and exclusive deals to create a sense of urgency and increase demand.
Right.
And it often works.
But is it really just about fear of missing out? Or is there something deeper at play?
Cialdini argues that scarcity also taps into a psychological phenomenon called psychological reactance.
Okay, that sounds complicated. Break it down for me.
It's our natural tendency to resist any attempt to restrict our freedom of choice. When something becomes scarce, we feel like our freedom to choose it is being threatened.
So it's like reverse psychology. The more they tell us we can't have it,
yeah,
the more we want it.
Exactly. And this triggers a rebellious response.
Wow.
Making us want the scarce item even more. Think about it. Have you ever noticed how much more you want something once it's sold out?
Oh, totally. It's like that one pair of shoes that I was kind of interested in until they were completely out of my size. Then I suddenly had to have them.
That's psychological reactance in action. It's a powerful force.
Yeah.
And marketers know exactly how to exploit it.
So limited time offers and exclusive deals aren't just about selling us something. They're about playing on our deep-seated need for freedom and autonomy.
That's a great insight.
Yeah.
And it highlights the importance of being aware of these psychological triggers so we can make more conscious and deliberate choices.
This is making me rethink all those impulse purchases I've made over the years.
Yeah.
I'm starting to see how these tactics can really cloud our judgment.
That's the power of persuasion.
Yeah. It's not always malicious, but it's always influential.
Well, so far we've explored the principles of click-word responses, reciprocation, social proof, liking, authority, and scarcity.
We have.
That's a lot to keep in mind.
It is.
Is there anything else we need to know about the psychology of persuasion?
We've covered the main principles.
Okay.
But there's one more aspect of Cialdini's work that I think is particularly relevant in today's world. The power of unity.
Unity. What do you mean by that?
Cialdini argues that we're more likely to be persuaded by people who we perceive as being part of our group, our tribe, or our community.
So it's like that saying, we're all in this together.
Exactly. And this sense of unity can be created in many ways.
Okay.
It could be based on shared values, common goals, or even just a feeling of belonging.
So compliance professionals might try to create a sense of unity with us to make us more receptive to their message.
Precisely. They might highlight shared interests.
Emphasize common enemies, or even just use language that makes us feel like we're part of an exclusive group.
That's fascinating. I'm starting to see how this principle plays out in everything from marketing to politics to social movements.
Absolutely. The power of unity is everywhere.
Yeah.
And it's a reminder that persuasion is often less about logic and facts.
Right.
And more about emotions and connections.
So if we feel like we're part of a group, we're more likely to go along with the group's norms and behaviors.
Exactly. And this can be a powerful force for both good and bad.
Right.
It can be used to promote cooperation and solidarity.
Yeah.
But it can also be used to manipulate and control.
This is making me think about the importance of choosing our tribes wisely.
That's a great insight. We need to be mindful of the groups we align ourselves with.
Yeah.
And make sure that their values and goals are truly aligned with our own.
Well, I'm definitely feeling a lot more aware of the subtle forces that can influence our behavior. But I'm also feeling a bit overwhelmed by all this information.
It's a lot to take in.
Yeah, it is.
But remember, you don't have to master all of these principles overnight. Just start by being aware of them and pay attention to how they're being used in your everyday life.
That's great advice. And I think it's important to remember that persuasion isn't always a bad thing. It can be used for good. It's about influence, not manipulation.
Exactly. It's about understanding the principles and using them ethically and responsibly.
Well, this deep dive has been incredibly enlightening. We've explored 6 key. Okay, so we've spent the first part of this deep dive exploring the subtle ways persuasion works. We've uncovered these hidden patterns in our behavior that compliance professionals and marketers can exploit. But now I'm ready to kind of shift gears a bit.
Okay.
What can we do to protect ourselves from being manipulated?
That's a great question. And it's the natural next step after gaining this awareness. Cialdini doesn't just want to expose these tactics.
Right.
He wants to empower us to resist them.
So how do we become more savvy consumers of information? And avoid falling prey to these sneaky tactics?
It starts with recognizing those click-word moments. Remember, these are automatic responses, triggered by specific cues. They can be useful in some situations, but they can also make us vulnerable to manipulation.
Right.
The key is to become aware of when they're happening.
So it's about hitting the pause button, right? Instead of reacting immediately, take a moment to analyze the situation.
Exactly. Ask yourself, why am I feeling pressured to say yes?
Right.
Is it because of a genuine reason, or am I being triggered by one of these persuasive tactics?
That makes a lot of sense. It's about bringing those automatic responses into our conscious awareness.
Yeah.
So we're not just reacting mindlessly, we're making deliberate choices.
Precisely. And this applies to all the principles we've discussed. For example, if you're feeling obligated to reciprocate a favor, ask yourself whether it aligns with your own values and priorities.
Right.
Or if you're being swayed by social proof, remember that popularity doesn't equal quality or truth.
Okay, so awareness is key.
Right.
What other strategies can we use to resist manipulation?
Trust your gut. If something feels off or too good to be true, it probably is.
Okay.
Don't be afraid to question authority figures.
Right.
Even if they have impressive titles or uniforms. And remember, you always have the right to say no.
I think that last point is so important. Sometimes we feel pressure to say yes out of politeness or a fear of confrontation.
Absolutely.
But it's crucial to remember that we have the power to set boundaries.
Absolutely. Your time, energy, and resources are valuable.
Right.
Don't let anyone guilt you into giving them away.
This reminds me of that classic line, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. If we start to recognize the patterns of manipulation, we could avoid falling for the same tricks over and over again.
Exactly. It's about learning from our experiences and becoming more discerning in our interactions. But remember, persuasion isn't always about manipulation or coercion.
Right.
It can be a force for good.
That's a great point. We focused on the dark side of persuasion.
Yeah.
But there's also a light side.
Absolutely. Cialdini emphasizes that these principles can be used ethically to promote positive change, encourage healthy behaviors, or inspire people to take action.
So it's not about avoiding persuasion altogether.
Right.
It's about understanding how it works.
Yeah.
And using that knowledge to make informed decisions.
Exactly. And it's about being mindful of our own persuasive attempts. We all use these principles, whether we realize it or not. The key is to use them responsibly and ethically.
This makes me think about how I interact with my kids. I'm constantly trying to persuade them to do things like eat their vegetables or clean their rooms.
And how do you approach that?
Well, I try to make it fun, or I'll offer them choices. Sometimes I even resort to a little bit of bribery.
You're already using some of these principles. Offering choices taps into the principle of autonomy. Making it fun taps into the principle of liking. And even a little bit of bribery can be seen as a form of reciprocation.
So I'm a master persuader without even realizing it.
Perhaps. The point is that we're all using these principles all the time. The key is to use them consciously and ethically.
Yeah. Okay, so we've talked about how to resist manipulation.
Yeah.
But what about becoming more persuasive ourselves? Are there ways to use these principles to influence others in a positive way?
Absolutely. And Cialdini provides some great insights on that as well. He argues that the most effective persuasion is based on authenticity, credibility, and a genuine desire to help others.
So no sneaky tricks or manipulative tactics.
Right. It's about building trust and rapport, not about exploiting people's weaknesses.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But how do we do that? How do we use these principles ethically to influence others?
Let's start with the principle of reciprocation. If you want someone to do something for you, consider doing something for them first. It doesn't have to be a grand gesture.
Right.
Even a small act of kindness can go a long way.
So it's about creating a sense of obligation, but in a positive way.
Exactly. And it's about being genuine and helpful, not manipulative.
What about social proof? How can we use that ethically?
Think about how you can showcase positive examples or testimonials that support your message. If you're trying to convince your team to adopt a new strategy, share success stories from other companies that have implemented it.
So it's about providing evidence that others have benefited from the same approach.
Precisely. And it's about highlighting the positive impact your idea or proposal could have on the group as a whole.
And what about authority? How can we use that principle without coming across as arrogant or overbearing?
Focus on building your credibility and expertise. Share your knowledge and insights generously, and be willing to acknowledge the limitations of your perspective.
That makes sense. So it's about demonstrating that you're knowledgeable and trustworthy.
Yeah.
But also humble and open to feedback.
Exactly. And remember, authenticity is key. People can spot a phony a mile away.
Okay, so we can use reciprocation, social proof, and authority ethically to influence others.
Right.
What about liking? Is it okay to use that principle to our advantage?
It is. But again, it's about being genuine and building authentic connections. Find common ground with the people you're trying to persuade. Show a genuine interest in their perspectives and needs. And don't be afraid to use humor and warmth to create a positive and engaging interaction.
So it's not about being fake or manipulative. It's about building rapport and creating a connection.
Exactly. People are more likely to be persuaded by people they like and trust.
This makes me think about those charismatic leaders who seem to effortlessly inspire and motivate others.
They're often masters of the liking principle. They create a sense of connection and belonging that makes people want to follow their lead.
And what about scarcity? How can we use that principle ethically?
Highlight the unique benefits or limited time opportunities associated with your proposal. But be honest and transparent. Don't create false scarcity or pressure people into making decisions they're not ready to make.
So it's about emphasizing the value of what you're offering.
Yeah.
But also respecting people's autonomy.
Exactly. And it's about focusing on the positive aspects of scarcity, like exclusivity and opportunity, rather than the negative aspects like fear and pressure.
This is giving me a whole new perspective on persuasion. It's not just about getting what we want. It's about understanding how influence works and using that knowledge to create positive outcomes for everyone involved.
You've hit the nail on the head. It's about being mindful of our impact on others and using our influence for good.
And it's about recognizing that persuasion is a skill that can be learned and refined.
Absolutely. The more we understand these principles, the more effective we can be in our communication and interactions.
Well, this deep dive has been incredibly insightful. We've explored the dark side of persuasion, learning how these principles can be used to manipulate and exploit. But we've also explored the light side, seeing how they can be used ethically to promote positive change and build stronger relationships.
Yes.
And we've learned that the key to effective persuasion is authenticity, credibility, and a genuine desire to help others.
It is.
But we're not done yet, are we?
Not quite. There's more to explore. We've talked about how these principles can be used to influence our choices, but we haven't talked about what we can do to protect ourselves from manipulation.
That sounds like a great topic for our next segment. I'm definitely ready to learn more about how to resist these persuasive tactics and become a more discerning consumer of information.
Excellent. Let's dive into that in part 2.
Wow. What a journey this deep dive has been. We've explored the subtle and sometimes not so subtle world of persuasion. From those automatic click-whir responses to the power of social proof and even how our nonverbal cues can influence others, we've really unpacked a lot.
It's amazing how many of these principles are at work in our everyday lives, isn't it?
It is.
We're constantly being influenced and, in turn, influencing others.
It's like we're all players in this grand game of persuasion, whether we realize it or not. So as we wrap up our deep dive into Robert Cialdini's influence, the psychology of persuasion, what are some of the key takeaways you think our listeners should keep in mind?
Well, first and foremost, awareness is key. By understanding these principles, you can start to recognize them in action, in advertising, in your interactions with colleagues, even in your conversations with loved ones.
It's like we've been given this decoder ring to decipher the hidden messages all around us.
Exactly. Once you start seeing these patterns, you can't unsee them. And that awareness gives you a certain level of power. You're no longer just reacting. You're making conscious choices about how you want to respond.
So it's not about becoming cynical or distrusting of everyone. It's about becoming more mindful and discerning.
Precisely. It's about taking back control of your decisions and not letting yourself be swayed by manipulative tactics.
Okay, so awareness is the first step.
Yeah.
What else can our listeners do to become more savvy consumers of persuasion?
Trust your gut. If something feels off or too good to be true or just plain pushy, it probably is. Don't be afraid to question authority, ask for evidence, or simply walk away from a situation that feels manipulative.
You know, it's interesting because before this deep dive, I might have brushed off that feeling as being too sensitive or overthinking it. But now I realize that those gut feelings are often warning signs that we shouldn't ignore.
You're absolutely right. Your intuition is a powerful tool, and it's often trying to tell you something important.
So we need to listen to that inner voice and not be afraid to trust our own judgment. What about when it comes to social proof? We talked about how powerful it can be, especially online.
Remember that popularity doesn't equal quality or truth. Just because something is trending or has a lot of positive reviews doesn't mean it's the right choice for you.
It's like those 5-star reviews on Amazon. Sometimes you read them and think, did we even buy the same product?
Exactly. Do your own research, consider your own needs and values, and don't be afraid to go against the grain.
So it's about being an independent thinker, not just blindly following the crowd. And what about scarcity? Those limited time offers and exclusive deals can be really tempting.
Take a deep breath and ask yourself, do I really need this? Or am I being swayed by the pressure to act now?
It's like that feeling of panic you get when you see a "only 2 left in stock" message.
Right.
You suddenly feel like you have to have it, even if you weren't that interested before.
Exactly. Remember, scarcity tactics are designed to create a sense of urgency and bypass your rational decision-making process.
So step back, assess the situation, and don't let yourself be pressured into making a decision you might regret later.
Excellent advice. And when it comes to authority, remember that expertise and trustworthiness are not always linked to titles or uniforms.
It's like that saying, don't judge a book by its cover. Just because someone has a fancy title or wears a lab coat doesn't mean they're always right.
Do your research, ask questions, and trust your own judgment. And remember, a little bit of humility can actually enhance someone's credibility.
So those experts who are willing to acknowledge the limitations of their knowledge or admit when they don't have all the answers might actually be the ones we should trust the most.
It's counterintuitive, but it's true. Humility and authenticity can be powerful persuasive tools.
Okay, so we've talked about how to resist manipulation. But before we wrap up, I want to circle back to the idea of using these principles ethically to become more persuasive ourselves.
Excellent point. Remember, influence isn't inherently good or bad. It's a tool. And like any tool, it can be used for positive or negative purposes.
So how do we make sure we're using this knowledge for good? How do we become ethical persuaders?
Focus on building genuine connections, being truthful and transparent, and respecting the other person's right to say no.
It's about influence, not coercion.
Exactly, and it's about using these principles to create win-win situations where both parties benefit.
So if we're trying to persuade our boss to give us a raise, we shouldn't resort to threats or manipulation. Instead, we should focus on highlighting our contributions, building rapport, and presenting a compelling case for why we deserve it.
Precisely. And remember the power of reciprocation. Have you been going above and beyond in your role? Have you consistently exceeded expectations? If so, subtly remind your boss of the value you've already provided.
It's like planting the seeds of reciprocity without being overly demanding or manipulative.
Exactly. And remember, the most effective persuasion comes from a place of authenticity and a genuine desire to help others.
Well said. So as we conclude this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a final thought. Persuasion is a powerful force, but it's not something to be feared. By understanding the principles at play, we can become more conscious communicators, more discerning consumers of information, and ultimately more empowered individuals.
Beautifully put. And remember, the journey of understanding persuasion is ongoing. Stay curious, stay informed, and keep exploring the fascinating world of human behavior.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, stay aware, stay true to yourselves, and keep those click word responses in check.